So with that, we leave chapter 26 and turn to chapter 27. Now, again, if you think chapter 27 is repeating a lot of what chapter 26 says, you are right. They do. But that's because the communism was so important an issue at the time. Anyway, all right. Communism. Chapter 27. Before I proceed, though, let's take a call roll in a minute. Once that computer fires back up, I'm going to call roll the computer this time. All right. Book starts off again with Stalin, and again, obviously, this is a lot of repeat. Stalin killed a whole lot of people in his inner circle in what they called purges. He would every once in a while become suspicious that somebody was out to get him, and he would have a purge where he'd kill, and nobody was safe. In fact, Khrushchev said he feared it every day that he worked for Stalin made his last, but if he left, he'd have been killed for sure. So he had to continue to work for the man and pretend to be loyal to the man. Under Stalin, though, the Soviet Union was able to develop the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb had been invented in 1945 by the United States.
Stalin invented the atomic bomb?
Stalin did not invent it. The Soviet Union was able to, I ought to say not invent it. The atomic bomb was invented by the United States. But in sometime around 1953, shortly before Stalin died, the Soviet Union developed one. I don't want to say invented, they didn't invent, but they developed one. Now, in order to develop the atomic bomb, the Soviet Union got a lot of help from Westerners. In other words, a lot of scientists, both in the United States and Great Britain, gave atomic secrets to Russia. Particularly, there was a couple named Rosenbergs, the two Rosenbergs, who were executed for treason. The Rosenbergs would send what they knew about the atomic bomb inside a pumpkin. And I don't know how they managed to seal up the pumpkin to where they could, but they'd hollow out a pumpkin, put the paper in it, and then put it inside a bunch of shipment of other pumpkins. And again, don't ask me how that they could tell that this pumpkin was the one that had the secrets in it. When the pumpkins reached Russia, the Russians would open up the pumpkin, and there inside the pumpkin was some secrets that they needed. The Rosenbergs were executed for treason. I had a student some years back do a paper. Now, with all respect, by today's standards, the Rosenbergs would never be executed because there wasn't enough proof. But in 1990, when we supposedly temporarily became friends with the Soviets again, some Soviet officials said, oh yes, the Rosenbergs helped us a great deal in developing the bomb. There was another British scientist who the Soviets said gave secrets, but he got away with it completely. But gave the Soviet Union a bunch of secrets. Again, you might ask, what would make Western scientists side with the Soviets? And the only answer I can give is, oh, I'm sorry if you think this is a state school, but some of them may have hated religion and hated Christianity and hated God, and decided that the Soviet Union was more to their liking, so they betrayed their own country, thinking they were doing humanity a favor. Again, I'm hesitant to say that at a state college, but it's the only thing I can figure out that some people just simply liked. The idea of a world takeover by a communistic country. The book at the bottom of page 791 says Stalin died, presumably of natural causes. But this has been, there are persons inside Russia who will say, or used to say, I killed Stalin. There are rumors that Stalin was shot in the head by a bullet. Nevertheless, supposedly he died of a stroke. And strokes kill a lot of people in those kind of leadership positions. After Stalin, Malenkov came to power. Malenkov did not last long. He was the one that they said he was in need of a rest, and they sent him away to rest, and he kept on resting and resting and resting, and is still resting to this day. But anyway, he didn't last long, and eventually Khrushchev took over. And Khrushchev was to govern the Soviet Union for about 12 years. Now, Khrushchev, by the way, made news recently. I may have mentioned this. Khrushchev was Ukrainian. And hey, Khrushchev had to sit and watch while Stalin's policy killed some 15 million Ukrainians. And then when Khrushchev came to power, he gave the Crimea to the Ukraine, which is his home state. And that has made news recently because the Crimea now has broken away, claiming that they really want to be part of Russia. And but Khrushchev was the one who initially gave the Crimea to the Ukraine. Khrushchev was best known for his policy of de-Stalinization. In other words, that I am not going to follow Stalin's footsteps, and he was a lot less evil than Stalin was. He released thousands of prisoners from concentration camps. Now, unfortunately, these reforms did not last. Now, here's the problem that any Soviet leader has. The mild-mannered ones get brushed aside and kicked out. The really hard-nosed ones live to die, at least appear to die a natural death. Khrushchev was mild. He eventually got shoved aside. Stalin was hard and harsh, and he might have lived long enough to die a natural death. Brezhnev was hard and harsh. Brezhnev tried to redo the policy of Stalin. He survived. No, the worst thing you can be if you're a Soviet, Russian leader, is mild-mannered. The best thing you can be is as mean as a snake. This was true of Russia under the Tsars and true of Russia in modern times. Khrushchev was ousted. The story is that one day in October he went on a vacation, to the Crimea, and he tried to get calls back to Crimea. After all, he was the leader, and at the Crimea he was told, nobody was taking his calls. He became alarmed, so he flew back to Moscow, and there he found, once he got to Moscow, he was not at all welcome. He was called into the Kremlin, and he sat stone-faced for 2 hours. The party officials read him out of the party and denounced him in the most scathing terms. And he just sat there and listened stone-faced. But they didn't kill him. Instead, they let him retire, put him in his apartment. He lived in his apartment with his children, at least some of his children, his grandchildren. And one of his grandchildren went to school and told the teacher, "Grandpa cries all the time. Grandpa is a very unhappy man." At least, though, they let him live. After his ouster, he lived about 7 or 8 years. He did a few interviews. Convinced that the communism was going to eventually triumph, and died in ouster, as have so many communist people. I mean, the communist system eats up its own people. Brezhnev was to govern for about 18 years. And Brezhnev did a lot to re-Stalinize the country, undo a lot of the reforms of Khrushchev. Soviet newspaper the Soviet press is called Pravda. I'm not going to write that down, but essentially you might hear some word of Pravda from time to time. Now, during Brezhnev's era, an author by the name of Solzhenitsyn Solzhenitsyn was an intellectual inside the Soviet Union, and he was critical of the Soviet system. And Brezhnev sent him to Siberia to what amounted to a concentration camp. But the whole world criticized Brezhnev for that. And finally, Brezhnev yielded to pressure and said to Solzhenitsyn, okay, you're free to go, just leave our country. So Solzhenitsyn came to the United States. You might think Solzhenitsyn was a happy man in the United States. He lived in Vermont, which had a climate somewhat similar to his climate in the Soviet Union. He would not take visits, but he spent his time writing. He finally went out and went to a few New England town meetings to get to know his neighbors a little bit and apologized for being so reclusive. But he finally said, I'm so unhappy here in the United States, I want to go home. And when Brezhnev died, he went back home. What did he find wrong with the United States? He said, I came to the United States expecting to see a people poised and prepared to take on the Soviet Union. He said, instead, I found a people in the United States who were disinterested in politics. The young people were more interested in tonight's football game. The young people were more interested in tonight's dance. And also, excuse me, he found a big problem with what he called Western decadence. In the Soviet Union, they did not allow pornography. They did not allow TV shows that showed, well, men sleeping with other men's wives. Shows like Dallas and Dynasty, things like that were outlawed. Solzhenitsyn said, here in America, I see a whole lot of corruption, a whole lot of decadence, a whole lot of sex just portrayed in front of everybody, which was not what he expected to see from what he thought was a godly country. And it bothered him, upset him. And he said the people here just simply are not the least bit interested in politics and not the least bit in world events. He said, now that I'm here, I realize what's wrong with America. It's too isolated from the rest of the world. And the people just simply want to live their own lives in isolation with no care about what's going on in the rest of the world. And after he spent several years in exile here, Brezhnev died, and he was happy to go back to the Soviet Union, and he died there. But from time to time, when I was a young man, some people would quote Solzhenitsyn and talk about him, but he found himself happier, almost happier inside a Soviet prison camp than he was as a free man in the United States. The Soviet people were really concerned, particularly when the Olympics were held in 1980. Some nations participated, and the Soviet parents tried to keep their children inside so they wouldn't be exposed to Western, what they call decadence. But instead, the rock music made its way inside the Soviet Union, and the young people began to like it. And the drug culture also seemed to follow the rock music. Now, folk, you can each of you decide how you want to take this, but somehow it seems like rock music and rock stars and the drug scene go hand in hand. And the Soviets said that long ago, and they outlawed rock music as much as they possibly could. Again, if any of you want to comment, you're welcome to. Elvis Presley was really upset. I mean, Elvis Presley was accused, even in the 1950s, your music makes young people think about sex and think about drugs and want to get high on drugs. And he said, I don't intend to do that. Well, I'm against drugs. He was very upset at the criticism. The Beatles came in, and of course when they came in, it seemed like the drug culture followed them. Again, each of you can make up your mind for yourself what you think of that, if you have any opinions on it at all. The Soviets were hard against modern art, among other things. They were against a lot of Western decadence. And a lot of Soviets who were allowed to come to the United States and live found themselves unhappy in the United States because of the decadence they saw. The Soviet Union was led by some old men. Brezhnev died in 1982, was succeeded by Andropov, and he only lived a couple of years. Well, yeah, lived 2 years to head the Soviet Union. Andropov had been head of the Soviet secret police. By the way, the present Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, was once part of the secret police also. He was succeeded by Chernenko and Chernenko, I believe. And Chernenko only lasted 1 year. And then finally, they got a younger man. Or they had some old men, Brezhnev, Andropov, and Chernenko, and finally they got a younger man. They said, we can't go on living like the people. We can't go on living like this. We can't. We need to redo everything. And with Gorbachev, they did somewhat undo and redo with everything.